Hey there, Alex Kidman here, and today I'm doing a slightly different review. Well, certainly slightly different to my normal fare, which is usually more on your smartphones or laptops or peripherals kind of viewpoint, because what I'm reviewing is the thing that I'm sitting in. It's a car, the MG ZS EV to be precise. And at the time of recording this, this was one of the more affordable EVs. Now, that's a very, very qualified statement, which I will get to shortly. Now, I do want to lay down a few ground rules before I start. I'm not a big car performance person, so you won't see me hooning this thing around a track or telling you exactly how fast it does 0 to 60 or anything like that. This is a more regular car review because I'm a much more regular get from A to B type driver. That's where my focus is. And the advantage there, I think, is there's more of us than there are of the performance people. Nothing against you if you're a performance style driver, but then I don't know that you particularly be looking at this car per se. I think the primary point of interest for a lot of Australians especially is in affordable EVs, and this is one of the lower cost EVs out there. Again, I will get to that shortly. Now, the thing is, while I'm not a car person in terms of that performance enthusiast space, I am an EV enthusiast, and I'm someone who owns a couple already. And my frames of reference for this are basically the two EVs that I drive on a regular basis. So most of the time you will find me getting around in a 2016 Nissan Leaf. That's an import. Fair bit cheaper than this car, but with some other considerations in play, of course, as an import vehicle, or a Tesla Model 3. Fair bit more expensive again. So my comparisons very much are going to sit in those spaces, but then those are decisions that Australians could also make in this kind of space. So the ZS EV is your classic kind of mini SUV shape. Got to be honest here, it is not my actual favorite shape for a vehicle, but I do understand they're super popular. Lots of people really, really rather like them. Bigger in the back, of course, than at the front. One little oddity to note here is the way you open the boot. It's actually by pushing in the MG logo here and pulling up, rather than by any kind of lower button or sensor or anything like that. I mean, it works. It just took me a little bit of time to work out, hey, that's how it works. But otherwise, pleasant enough car. This is the blue model, of course. Blue will cost you extra. I believe the white or the black models are the ones that are the standard paint in the MG world. It's a larger ride. It's a little bit higher up than, again, I particularly prefer. But again, tastes can totally vary. It's certainly a reasonable sort of looking vehicle, I think. So what about the internals? Well, look, most of it is fine. It's not exactly premium, but it's certainly got its own degree of snaz. I do rather like the fact that it does actually have an in-dash display, as distinct from, as I mentioned, the Tesla Model 3 that I sometimes drive, where it's all off to the side. I wish the Model 3 had that, but you do get basic speedo and power usage here. Some in-dash buttons, which I do like as well, because for a lot of these newer EVs, they're opting more for a lot more touchscreen control, which is not great when you're actually driving and should be paying attention to the road. The main display over here, again, entirely serviceable, nothing that's terribly difficult to work out or sort out. Now, the ZS EV does support, as it says just here, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, although only in a cabled configuration. You will have to bring your own cable, which you plug in down here to plug your own phone in. Underneath that display, there's also a little range of toggles for toggling the temperature, the fan speed, things like the volume. And then below that, you have a series of switches for the driving mode, what they call quirks, which is to do with their regenerative braking mode and battery. So the car itself has 3 different drive modes. You've got normal, you've got sport, you've got eco. Sport is a bit punchier, a bit bouncier, not to my taste, but obviously some people will like it. The one thing that slightly irks me here is I genuinely want to drive in eco mode all the time, so like that. But the car will default back to normal every single time you stop. It, again, minor niggle, but one that does stick with me. In terms of in-car storage, you've got, standard kind of glove box, just a regular latch, a little bit plasticky. Same with down here, we have a little kind of plasticky cover for your drink holders or mask holders, I'm using it there, and then a slightly larger compartment just behind. This is all fairly standard, and look, it's not super premium, but it's perfectly nice. I like the trim and finish, and it's fine, and I feel fairly appropriate for the cost of the vehicle. The back seat is, well, I mean, it's a back seat. I can fit in here, but it's not great if you're a much, much taller person. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Now, admittedly, I do have the passenger seat back a little bit. This will be totally workable for most drives. The seats are a little hard to my feel. In the back, you're not faced with a whole lot, apart from my knees. Standard little carrying space just there. 2 simple USB chargers and air vents there. That's about your lot, really. You'd get 3 people in here, but they'd have to be fairly comfy and snug within each other, I think. So what about price? I did mention that this was one of the lower cost EVs in Australia, although that shouldn't be confused with being cheap. This is not an inexpensive car because no EV in Australia is as yet. Word of advice, by the way, if you're an international viewer, the EV market in Australia is not that mature. We just don't have that many low-cost choices. So while you're free to point out, hey, this car exists or that car exists, not necessarily for sale in Australia just yet, but this one is. Now, the price does vary a little bit by state. That's presumably just state taxes and levies at play. I'll put the price up here, for example, in New South Wales for the official kind of retail price for these vehicles. Now, bear in mind that there's a whole bunch of rebates that you can get against these kinds of vehicles as I'm recording this. So you can probably score one of these in most parts of Australia for somewhere around $45,000 to $46,000. That's still a fair amount to pay for a car, of course, but it's well below that of your kind of premium models like my aforementioned previous Model 3. A fair bit more, though, than an import older EV like the Nissan Leaf. But this is still one of the lower cost models out there. I mean, the basic competition it's got right now as I speak is BYD's Atto 3, although Cupra is also coming into market fairly hot fairly soon. Hoping to check one of those out. But not an inexpensive car by any stretch of the imagination. And what I really wanted to tackle with this review, because I'm aware there's a ton of other reviews, you could be watching a lot of other content on this car or on other EVs. What I really wanted to tackle were those kind of common questions that I get hit with EVs and what they can do and what they can't do. So for example, can I go and get my shopping into the back of this car? Yep, sure can. Quite easily too. There's plenty of space in here. Okay, I think we need something a little bit more challenging. Could I get flat pack furniture from a major Swedish brand into the back of this car? Yes, that's doable within reason. I will say I did have to slide the passenger seat forward a bit to get this to fully fit, and I could get the same piece of furniture actually into my seemingly smaller Leaf. But still, yeah, it'll work. The boot will close. I could drive away a happy man with my flat pack furniture. And obviously you've got to tackle the other important questions like, can it go through the drive-through of a major fast food restaurant? Yeah, it can do that. So all, regular everyday driving stuff, entirely doable in an EV, just in case you were curious. Of course, you could ask slightly less serious questions like, will it explode in a shower of sparks if it happens to get wet? I mean, it is electric. To which the answer is, well, look, so far so good. No, that's a silly question, really. These are actually remarkably safe vehicles in that sense. Okay, what about charging, though? Because this is a big one, and lots of people have concerns over this. So, can you charge it from a public charging port, for example? Well, yes, in theory. No, in practice. A quick explainer here. One side of this charger I could have used if I'd had a Type 2 to Type 2 cable, but they're not standard with the car. Very good idea to buy one, but as I was only a loaner car, I didn't have one of those. The other side was out of order. Every other charger was busy. So while in theory I might have been able to charge, in practice I couldn't. Sydney's not so great about this, but again, it is sort of getting better. But of course, it relies on them actually being in working order. Oh yeah, that didn't work out quite so well, although that's not the fault of the MG. That's the charger, and that's a different problem, really, that affects an awful lot of EVs in Australia right now. It's getting better. It is getting better. More work needs to be done. But what about charging at home? Can I do that? get this more detailed battery charging screen. Now, if I want to be hypercritical, some of the language translations are slightly kind of clunky grammar, which I don't personally love that much. This isn't exactly a critical problem though. You still totally understand what it's talking about, what it's doing and how it is going. This is of course off a slower charger. It does say slow charging, although it's off a Tesla Gen 3 wall charger. So were I charging from the supplied cable that they use, which just goes into an ordinary power socket, it would be considerably slower than this. That's a choice, of course. And a brief pause here, of course, if you're thinking, hang on, you're charging off a Tesla charger, aren't they for Teslas only? Not quite so, just in case you weren't aware. If you're talking about a Tesla home charger, and especially the Gen 3, you can configure those through software to talk to most other EVs that can take that plug type. For the destination chargers you might find at hotels and so on, some of them will work, some of them won't. PlugShare can be quite good at working out whether or not they've actually been configured the right way. In some cases, you might find that the hotel proprietor knows what they're talking about and will happily open it up. In others, it's just been installed and the staff don't really know. So it pays to do your research, basically, but you can cross-charge. That's not the case for most of the Tesla superchargers in Australia at the moment, although as I'm recording this, they have opened up. I think it's half a dozen of them in regional areas in certain places, like in Bathurst and in Dubbo, for example, where other vehicles can use them at a slightly higher charge cost. But that's a different kind of charging setup. So in terms of the actual drive, you do get that nice immediate EV power. It's quite springy, it's quite nimble for a vehicle of this size, especially in sport mode, if you like that kind of thing. In this Essence model, in the higher spec model, you also get a wireless charger in the spot where you're meant to put the phone, although larger phones might struggle to be in there and you've got to be happy for them to be sideways. I should probably also talk about range. So at full spec, full charge, this reckons it'll do about 320 kilometers. Now that's obviously a variable figure because temperature, distance, speed, elevation, all of those things play into your range no matter what kind of car you're in. And I've got to be honest here, while I've had this car for a week, I have not quite had the time to do a full let's exhaust the battery multi-day trip. It just hasn't been feasible on my schedule. Sorry about that. I have done some mid-range drives though. So for example, heading from Sydney to the Central Coast and back again, round trip journey of about 120 kilometers, used about 35% of the battery. And doing a bit of back of envelope maths there, that suggests that you should be able to get nearly up to around 300 kilometers of range. That's within striking distance, certainly, of what this claims, which isn't bad. You also get regenerative braking, a system that MG calls quirks, and it's got 3 separate levels of severity. My one complaint here is that the top spec level is achingly close to full one pedal braking. So in the Model 3, for example, I get one pedal braking and I really rather like it. So I can just lift my foot off the accelerator and it will come to a complete stop. I can trust it, it works, and I get full regenerative braking. I get as much power back into the battery as it can handle. This comes like 90% of the way, but if you left it, you would bump into the vehicle in front of you. And it almost feels like it's teasing me. I wish it just did a little bit more. To be fair, the Leaf doesn't have this at all. It's got some regenerative braking modes, but it won't slow down anywhere near as much as this will. I just wish this did a little more. So you do get cruise control, and it totally does work. I mean, cruise control is not a new technology, of course. My one niggle here is that the cruise control is controlled via secondary stalk on the left-hand side. I wish it wasn't there. It's a little bit too easy to kind of confuse when you're trying to indicate versus when you're actually trying to initiate cruise control or make a change to the speed or what have you. Minor niggle, but then, you know, these things do add up. So one of my other complaints, and it's not a big complaint to be fair, but one of my other complaints is with the in-car GPS. Now, it totally works. You can do all the things you'd expect to do with GPS, and of course, you can use Google Maps or Apple Maps if you've got a connected phone hooked up to the car. But if you're using the in-car GPS, whether or not you've got a route picked out, it has this habit of giving off this annoying and slightly alarming chime that, as far as I can see, you can't turn off. And so you'll be driving along thinking, right, well, you know, the world is going along just fine. I'm following the route I've prescribed, or I'm just driving around a familiar kind of, and there we go. It'll give you that little chime. Now you might think, well, what does that chime mean? Are my tires going flat? Am I running out of power? Did I go too close to the car? No, it doesn't mean any of those things at all. All it means is that you've changed suburbs. As far as it's concerned, it's just announcing, hey, you're now in a new suburb. And I don't see the point. And I really don't see the point because it's not all that accurate either. I've had it announced that I'm in the same suburb more than once while in that suburb. I wish there was a way to switch it off. I've not been able to find one. If you do know how to do that, if you do know how to silence it without silencing the rest of the car, please let me know in the comments below because I'd genuinely like to know. So would I buy an MG ZS EV? Me personally? No, I wouldn't. I don't actually have a need for this particular car at this time. And moreover, as I've already said, I'm not as big a fan of that smaller SUV concept as so many people are. But I recognise that I'm an outlier there. A lot of people really do like this sort of thing, really do appreciate that size and shape, and they feel that it's got all sorts of advantages to them. And if you're in that camp, then this is well worth your consideration, because running an EV is better for the planet, it's cheaper to run, there are rebates you can get. I think it's a pretty decent deal. Now, we could all wish that there were considerably cheaper EVs available on the market, and hopefully over time that will come. But as it stands right now, yeah, this is a pretty good buy if you like that smaller SUV shape. Outside of that, if this was a little hatch, I'd probably be a lot more personally keen on it. Anyway, that's my take on the MG ZS EV. As you're viewing this, I don't have the car anymore, but I'm happy to take questions, comments, any criticisms you've got, anything you'd like. Thanks for watching all the way to the end, and as a bonus, you get a shot of the cat that I went to visit on the Central Coast.